In the bustling rural town of Enugu, a modest grocery store sat on the edge of the marketplace. The store, marked by peeling yellow paint and a sign that read Ambrose's Groceries, had once been a thriving symbol of prosperity. Now, it was a constant reminder of all Jane had lost. Every morning, Jane, a widow in her late 30s, rose before dawn to begin her day. Her life was a far cry from what it used to be, but she found purpose in her daughters, Mirabel and Rose, and in keeping Ambrose's dream alive. Jane was a striking woman despite the toll life had taken on her. Her deep brown eyes carried a mixture of warmth and sorrow, and her slender frame was the result of years of hard work and skipped meals. Her daughters Mirabel and Rose were her pride and joy. At 14, Mirabel was tall for her age, with sharp features and an inquisitive mind. She often spoke of becoming a lawyer, determined to fight for justice in a world that seemed so unjust to her family. Rose, her 12-year-old sister, was quieter but no less brilliant. She had a natural talent for drawing and could often be found sketching with a stub of charcoal on old scraps of paper. Life had been kind to them once. Ambrose, Jane's late husband, had been the backbone of their family. Known for his kindness and integrity, he had worked tirelessly to provide for them. But 2 years ago, their world crumbled when Ambrose suffered a sudden stroke and passed away. His death left Jane to shoulder the responsibility of raising their daughters and running the grocery store he had built. Despite her efforts to maintain the business, Jane faced constant interference from Ambrose's family. Caleb, Ambrose's elder brother, had been the most vocal, a man with a stocky build and a permanent scowl. Caleb was known for his arrogance and greed. He had always envied Ambrose's success, and after his brother's death, he wasted no time asserting his claim over the family's assets. One evening, as the orange hues of the setting sun bathed the small living room, Caleb arrived unannounced. He sat on Jane's worn-out sofa, his arms crossed over his chest, and spoke with a tone that dripped with condescension. "Jane," Caleb began, his voice low and calculated, "you know our customs. Without a man in this house, it will be difficult for you to manage Ambrose's affairs. The family has decided it's best for you to marry someone who can take care of you and the girls." Jane clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. She knew where this was headed. "And who would this someone be?" she asked, her voice steady despite the anger bubbling beneath the surface. Caleb leaned back, a smug smile playing on his lips. "It's only right that you marry within the family. I am willing to take on the responsibility. It's the best option for everyone." Jane felt a surge of rage. She stood, towering over Caleb despite her smaller frame. "I will not marry you, Caleb," she said firmly. "This is my home. These are Ambrose's children. I will raise them myself." Caleb's smile vanished, replaced by a cold glare. "You're making a mistake, Jane. A woman cannot manage a home and a business alone. And those daughters of yours? They're just girls. They won't amount to anything." Jane's heart ached at his words, but she refused to let him see her pain. "Get out," she said, her voice unwavering. Caleb rose, his large frame casting a shadow over her. "This isn't over," he said before storming out. After Caleb left, Jane sank onto the sofa, her resolve wavering for the first time that day. She glanced at the framed photograph of Ambrose on the wall, his warm smile offering little solace. Later that evening, as Jane prepared dinner in their small kitchen, Mirabel entered, carrying a stack of books. She placed them on the table and sat down, watching her mother with a concerned expression. "Mom," Mirabel began hesitantly, "Uncle Caleb came by earlier." "What did he want?" Jane paused, her hands gripping the knife she was using to chop vegetables. "Nothing important," she said, trying to dismiss the topic. "But I heard him shouting," Mirabel pressed. "Is he trying to take the shop again?" Jane sighed and turned to face her daughter. "Mirabel, there are some things you don't need to worry about. Your job is to focus on school and your dreams." "But Mom, how can I not worry? I'm old enough to understand what's going on," Mirabel argued, her voice rising with frustration. Jane placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Listen to me, Mirabel. No matter what happens, I will protect you and your sister. I promise." The next morning, Jane arrived at the market earlier than usual. The sun had barely risen, and the air was crisp. She opened the shop and began arranging the shelves, determined to put Caleb's threats out of her mind. As customers trickled in, Jane forced a smile, greeting each one warmly. Among them was Mama Eugene, an elderly woman known for her sharp tongue and even sharper eyes. She approached the counter, her arms laden with vegetables. "Jane," Mama Eugene said, her voice loud enough to draw the attention of nearby customers, "I heard Caleb was here yesterday. What does that man want now?" Jane hesitated, not wanting to air her troubles in public. "It's nothing, Mama Eugene," she replied, trying to change the subject. Mama Eugene wasn't one to be deterred. She placed her hands on her hips and leaned closer. "Don't let that man intimidate you, Jane. He's just like his father, always looking to take what isn't his." Jane nodded, grateful for the older woman's support. "Thank you, Mama Eugene. I'll handle it." But as the day wore on, Jane couldn't shake the feeling of dread that Caleb's visit had left behind. She knew she couldn't fight this battle alone, but she also knew she couldn't give up. Her daughters depended on her, and she would do whatever it took to secure their future. The sun rose slowly over the town of Enugu, casting golden light across the rooftops. Jane stood outside Ambrose's groceries, unlocking the creaking metal shutters. The market was coming alive around her, the hum of traders setting up their stalls filling the air. But Jane's mind was elsewhere, weighed down by Caleb's recent visit. Inside the shop, she moved with mechanical precision, arranging goods on the shelves and sweeping the dusty floor. Her daughters, Mirabel and Rose, had left for school earlier, their laughter echoing faintly in her memory. Their joy was a reminder of why she couldn't let Caleb or anyone else take away what Ambrose had left behind. By mid-morning, the shop was bustling with customers. Jane forced herself to focus, greeting each one with a smile and carefully counting change. But as the day wore on, a familiar figure appeared in the doorway. Caleb. He strode in with an air of entitlement, his large frame filling the small space. Jane's chest tightened, but she kept her expression neutral. "What do you want, Caleb?" she asked, her tone colder than she intended. Caleb smirked, picking up a tin of milk from the shelf and inspecting it lazily. "Is that how you greet family, Jane?" "I came to talk." "We have nothing to talk about," Jane replied sharply, her hands tightening around the counter. Caleb set the tin down and leaned against the counter, his dark eyes narrowing. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. The family has decided. You either marry into the family, or we take over the shop and the land. It's tradition." Jane's heart raced, but she stood her ground. "Tradition?" she scoffed. "This isn't about tradition, Caleb. This is about your greed. Ambrose worked hard for this shop, and I won't let you take it away." Caleb's expression darkened. "You think you can do this alone, Jane? You're just a woman with 2 daughters, girls. They won't carry on the family name or legacy. You're wasting everyone's time." Jane felt a surge of anger. "Don't you dare talk about my daughters like that. They are worth more than you'll ever understand." Caleb straightened, his voice dropping to a menacing tone. "You've been warned, Jane. The family won't wait forever." Without another word, he turned and left, leaving Jane trembling with a mix of fear and fury. That evening, Jane sat with Mirabel and Rose at the dinner table. The meal was simple: boiled yams with a small dish of palm oil, but it was all they could afford. Mirabel noticed her mother's silence and exchanged a glance with Rose. "Mom," Mirabel said cautiously, "did Uncle Caleb come to the shop again?" Jane hesitated, not wanting to burden her daughters with her troubles, but she also knew they deserved to know the truth. "Yes," she admitted, "he's trying to take the shop and the land." Rose's eyes widened in alarm. "But why?" "It belongs to Daddy." "Because they think we don't deserve it," Jane said bitterly. "They think just because we're women, we're not capable of running things." Mirabel's jaw tightened. "That's not fair. Daddy would never have let this happen." Jane reached across the table and took her daughter's hand. "I know, Mirabel, but we have to be strong. We can't let them win." Rose, who had been quiet, spoke up. "What can we do, Mom? They're so much bigger than us." Jane looked at her youngest daughter, her heart aching. "We fight, Rose. We fight with everything we have." The next few days passed uneventfully, but Jane knew better than to think Caleb had given up. Sure enough, one afternoon, she found a group of men surveying the small plot of farmland Ambrose had left behind. "What are you doing here?" Jane demanded, striding toward them. One of the men, a weary fellow with a clipboard, glanced up. We're measuring the land. Caleb said it's being sold. Jane's stomach dropped. Sold? This land is not for sale. The man shrugged. You'll have to take that up with him. We're just doing our job. Fuming, Jane marched back to her house and grabbed her phone. She dialed Caleb's number, her hands shaking with anger. Caleb, she said when he answered. What do you think you're doing? Ah, Jane, Caleb replied, his tone infuriatingly calm. I see you've noticed. The land is being sold to settle family debts. It's out of your hands now. You have no right. Jane shouted. That land belongs to my daughters. They're just girls, Caleb said dismissively. They don't need land. Jane hung up, tears of frustration streaming down her face. She knew she couldn't fight Caleb alone, but she also knew she couldn't give up. The next Sunday after church, Jane decided to seek advice from Pastor Michael, a kind and compassionate man who had been a friend of the family for years. She found him in his office, surrounded by books and papers. Jane, he said warmly, gesturing for her to sit. What brings you here? Jane explained the situation, her voice trembling as she recounted Caleb's attempts to take everything Ambrose had left behind. Pastor Michael listened intently, his brow furrowed. This is a difficult situation, he said finally, but you must stand firm. Have you considered seeking legal advice? Jane shook her head. I can't afford a lawyer, Pastor. The shop barely makes enough to cover our expenses. Pastor Michael nodded thoughtfully. I understand. But remember, God is on your side. The truth will prevail. And if you ever need help, don't hesitate to ask. Jane left the church feeling a small glimmer of hope. She didn't know how, but she was determined to protect her daughter's future. Later that week, Jane received an unexpected visitor, Caleb's wife, Clara. Clara was a quiet woman who rarely spoke up, but Jane had always suspected she didn't agree with her husband's actions. Jane, Clara said hesitantly, standing at the doorway. Can I talk to you? Jane nodded, stepping aside to let her in. They sat in the small living room, the air heavy with unspoken tension. I don't agree with what Caleb is doing, Clara said finally. But he won't listen to me. Then why are you here? Jane asked, her tone guarded. Because I want you to know you're not alone, Clara said. If there's anything I can do to help, I will. Jane was taken aback. She had always thought of Clara as complicit in Caleb's schemes, but now she saw the fear and guilt in the other woman's eyes. Thank you, Jane said quietly. That means more than you know. As the days turned into weeks, Jane began to notice small acts of sabotage at the shop. Boxes of goods would go missing. Customers would complain about receiving less than they paid for. And rumors began circulating that the shop was going bankrupt. Jane knew Caleb was behind it, but she had no proof. The stress was taking its toll on her, and even Mirabel and Rose noticed. Mom, you look tired, Mirabel said one evening as they sat together. I'm fine, Jane replied, though her voice lacked conviction. We're going to get through this, Mirabel said firmly. We're Ambrose's family, and we're not giving up. Hearing her daughter's determination reignited a spark in Jane. She wasn't going to let Caleb win. Not now. Not ever. The tension in the air around Jane's home and shop became palpable as Caleb's schemes grew bolder. Each day brought a new challenge. From missing goods in the shop to cryptic messages delivered by Caleb's lackeys, Jane could feel the walls closing in, but she knew giving up was not an option. One crisp morning, Jane sent Mirabel and Rose off to school, their backpacks slung over their shoulders. Watching them walk down the dusty path, their chatter filling the air, Jane felt a pang of guilt. Her daughters deserved better than this constant strife, but she couldn't shield them from reality. That day, Jane received another blow. A young man from the local council arrived with a letter in hand. He looked uncomfortable as he handed it to her, avoiding eye contact. What is this? Jane asked, unfolding the paper with trembling hands. The letter was an official notice, informing her that the family land Ambrose had left behind was under dispute, and that the council would hold a meeting to resolve the matter. This can't be happening, Jane muttered, her voice shaking. She clutched the letter to her chest, her heart pounding. The man hesitated before speaking. Ma, I'm sorry, but Caleb has powerful friends on the council. You need to prepare for the worst. Jane nodded numbly as the man left. Her mind raced with questions. How could Caleb stoop so low? And how could she fight him when he had the council in his pocket? Later that evening, Jane sat at the kitchen table, the letter lying in front of her like a ticking time bomb. Mirabel and Rose sat across from her, their faces etched with worry. "What does it mean, Mom?" Rose asked softly, her voice trembling. Jane looked at her daughters, her heart aching. "It means Caleb is trying to take everything from us again, but we're not going to let him." Mirabel's eyes blazed with determination. "We'll fight him, Mom. We'll show him we're stronger than he thinks." Jane smiled faintly, grateful for her eldest daughter's resilience. But deep down, she wondered how long they could keep fighting. The day of the council meeting arrived quickly, and Jane found herself standing in the small, dimly lit hall where such disputes were resolved. The room was packed with people, most of whom had come to watch the drama unfold. Caleb sat at the front, flanked by his cronies, his smug expression making Jane's blood boil. Jane stood alone, clutching a folder of documents that proved the land belonged to Ambrose and by extension, to her and her daughters. The council chairman, a stern-looking man named Mr. Bennett, called the meeting to order. He glanced at Jane and Caleb before addressing the room. "We are here to resolve a land dispute between Jane and Caleb," he began. "Jane claims the land belongs to her late husband, Ambrose, while Caleb claims it is family property. Both sides will present their case." Caleb stood first, his voice smooth and confident. He painted a picture of a struggling family trying to uphold tradition, portraying Jane as an outsider who had no respect for their customs. When it was Jane's turn to speak, her hands trembled as she stood. She took a deep breath, willing herself to stay calm. "My husband, Ambrose, worked hard to buy that land," she said, her voice steady despite her nerves. "He wanted it to be a legacy for our daughters. It's not about tradition, it's about greed. Caleb doesn't care about our family, he only cares about what he can take." There was a murmur of agreement from some in the audience, but Caleb's cronies quickly drowned it out with their protests. Mr. Bennett held up a hand, silencing the crowd. "Thank you, Jane. We will now review the evidence." Jane handed over the documents, praying they would be enough. She watched as Mr. Bennett and the other council members examined them, their faces unreadable. After what felt like an eternity, Mr. Bennett looked up. "The documents appear to be in order, but we will need time to verify their authenticity. In the meantime, the land will remain under dispute." Jane's heart sank. It wasn't the outright victory she had hoped for, but it was better than losing the land altogether. As Jane left the hall, Caleb caught up to her. His face was a mask of fury, his calm demeanor from earlier completely gone. "You think you've won, don't you?" he hissed. "This isn't over, Jane. You'll regret crossing me." Jane met his gaze, her fear replaced by defiance. "Do whatever you want, Caleb. I'm not giving up." Over the next few weeks, Jane's resolve was tested again and again. Caleb's men began harassing her customers, spreading rumors about her shop and driving away business. At one point, a group of men even vandalized the shop, smashing windows and scattering goods. Mirabel and Rose tried to help their mother as much as they could, but Jane could see the toll it was taking on them. Rose, usually cheerful and carefree, had become quiet and withdrawn. Mirabel, on the other hand, had grown more outspoken, often challenging Caleb's men when they came around. One day, Mirabel confronted Jane as they were closing up the shop. "Mom, we can't keep living like this. We need help." Jane sighed, leaning against the counter. "I know, Mirabel, but who can we turn to? Caleb has everyone in his pocket." Mirabel hesitated before speaking. "What about Pastor Michael? He said we could ask for help if we needed it." Jane considered her daughter's words. She had always been reluctant to ask for charity, but the situation was becoming desperate. "You're right," she said finally. "We'll go see him tomorrow." The next morning, Jane and her daughters went to the church. Pastor Michael greeted them warmly, his kind eyes filled with concern as he listened to their story. "This is a terrible injustice," he said when they finished. "But you're not alone, Jane. The community is on your side, even if it doesn't feel that way." As he stormed off, Jane turned to her daughters. "Don't be afraid," she said, though her voice trembled slightly. "We're going to get through this together." He paused, then added, "I'll speak to some people who might be able to help. In the meantime, stay strong. God is with you." Jane left the church feeling a renewed sense of hope. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to believe that they might come out of this stronger. But Caleb wasn't done yet. That evening, he showed up at Jane's house, his face twisted with anger. "You think you're clever, don't you?" he snarled, running to the church, turning people against me. "But I'm warning you, Jane, this will end badly for you." Jane stood her ground, her daughters watching from the doorway. "Get off my property, Caleb. I won't let you intimidate me." Caleb laughed coldly. "We'll see about that." The days following Caleb's visit were a whirlwind of tension and fear for Jane and her daughters. Caleb's threats hung over them like a dark cloud. And even though Pastor Michael had promised to help, Jane couldn't shake the feeling that Caleb wasn't finished. At the shop, Jane worked tirelessly to rebuild what Caleb's men had destroyed. Mirabel and Rose helped after school, but customers were slow to return. Many were afraid of being caught in Caleb's crosshairs, and Jane couldn't blame them. One evening, as Jane closed up the shop, Mirabel approached her with a determined expression. "Mom, we need to take this to the authorities. Caleb is breaking the law, and he can't keep getting away with it." Jane hesitated. She had always avoided involving the police, fearing they might be under Caleb's influence. But Mirabel's words struck a chord. Why should they continue to suffer in silence? "You're right," Jane said, surprising herself. "We'll file a report first thing tomorrow." The next morning, Jane and Mirabel went to the local police station. The building was old and crumbling, but Jane hoped the officers inside would still uphold justice. A young officer named Mark greeted them at the counter. He listened intently as Jane explained the situation, taking notes as she spoke. "This is a serious matter," Mark said when she finished. "We've heard complaints about Caleb before, but no one has been brave enough to come forward with evidence." Jane handed over photographs of the vandalism and a written account of Caleb's threats. Mark nodded as he reviewed the materials. "We'll investigate this," he promised, "but you should be prepared for backlash. Caleb won't take this lightly." Jane thanked him and left the station with a mix of relief and anxiety. Filing the report felt like a step in the right direction, but she knew Caleb wouldn't go down without a fight. True to Mark's warning, Caleb retaliated almost immediately. That evening, a group of his men appeared at Jane's house, shouting and banging on the gate. "Come out, Jane," one of them yelled. "You think you can run to the police and get away with it?" Jane held her daughters close as they huddled inside the house. Her heart pounded as the men continued their tirade, but she refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her fear. Eventually, the men left, but the message was clear. Caleb wasn't going to back down. The next day, Jane met with Pastor Michael to discuss the situation. He listened patiently as she recounted the latest developments, his expression growing more serious with each word. "This has gone too far," he said finally. "Caleb needs to be held accountable, but you can't do this alone. The community needs to stand with you." Pastor Michael organized a meeting at the church that evening, inviting members of the community to come and show their support for Jane. To Jane's surprise, the turnout was overwhelming. The small church was packed with people, many of whom had their own grievances against Caleb. One by one, they shared their stories of intimidation, theft, and broken promises. As Jane listened, she realized she wasn't alone. Caleb's greed had affected countless others, and they were all ready to stand up to him. The following week was a turning point. With the community's support, Jane and Pastor Michael approached higher authorities, bypassing the local police. They filed a formal petition with the regional council, detailing Caleb's actions and the evidence against him. The council agreed to hear the case, scheduling a public hearing that would be open to everyone in the community. When Caleb received the notice, his arrogance faltered. For the first time, he realized he was losing control of the narrative. He tried to intimidate witnesses and bribe council members, but the community's collective resolve was unshakable. The day of the hearing arrived, and the town hall was packed. Jane sat with Pastor Michael and her daughters, clutching their hands for support. Caleb sat across the room, his face a mask of anger and defiance. The council members listened carefully as Jane and other witnesses testified. They presented evidence of Caleb's harassment, theft, and manipulation, painting a damning picture of his greed and cruelty. Caleb's defense was weak, consisting mostly of denial and vague claims about family traditions. The council members were unimpressed, and by the end of the hearing, it was clear where their decision would land. In a unanimous ruling, the council declared that the land rightfully belonged to Jane and her daughters. They also ordered Caleb to compensate Jane for the damages to her shop and issued a stern warning against any further harassment. The room erupted in applause as the decision was announced. Jane felt tears streaming down her face as she hugged her daughters. After months of struggle, justice had finally prevailed. That evening, the community gathered at Jane's shop to celebrate. People who had once been too afraid to speak out against Caleb now cheered for Jane's victory. As the celebration continued, Pastor Michael pulled Jane aside. "You've shown incredible strength, Jane," he said. "Your daughters are lucky to have a mother like you." Jane smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without everyone's support. This victory belongs to all of us." Later that night, as Jane tucked Mirabel and Rose into bed, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in months. "Mom," Mirabel said softly, "I'm proud of you. You didn't give up, even when things were tough." Jane kissed her daughter's forehead, her voice steady as she replied, "And neither did you. We're stronger together, and we'll keep moving forward no matter what." As she turned off the light and closed the door, Jane allowed herself to hope for a brighter future. She knew there would still be challenges ahead, but she also knew they could overcome anything as long as they stood together. With the victory against Caleb, Jane felt a sense of relief, but she also knew it was only the beginning. The council's ruling had been a major win, but rebuilding her life and restoring her daughter's sense of security would take time. Jane decided that instead of letting the experience break them, it would serve as a catalyst for growth and resilience. Jane spent the weeks after the hearing focusing on her shop. The community's support after Caleb's defeat brought a surge of customers, eager to contribute to her recovery. Mirabel and Rose helped after school, sweeping the floors and arranging goods on the shelves. Their smiles returned, a stark contrast to the fear and uncertainty that had once clouded their faces. One sunny afternoon, Jane noticed Rose sketching on a piece of paper while sitting behind the counter. Curious, she approached her youngest daughter. "What are you drawing, my dear?" Jane asked, peeking at the paper. Rose shyly turned the drawing toward her mother. It was a detailed sketch of the shop, bustling with customers. "I want to design things, Mom," Rose said softly, "like logos and posters. Maybe one day I can help businesses like yours look beautiful." Jane felt a lump in her throat. Her daughters had always been her driving force, and seeing Rose dream about the future filled her with pride. "You'll do amazing things, Rose," Jane said, kissing her forehead. "I believe in you." Later that evening, as Jane prepared dinner, Mirabel approached her with a hesitant look. "Mom, can I talk to you?" "Of course, darling," Jane said, putting down her spoon and giving her full attention. "I've been thinking," Mirabel began. "I want to organize something for the community. Maybe a workshop or a small event to thank everyone who stood by us. It could also be a way to bring people together and encourage them to keep supporting each other." Jane's eyes sparkled with admiration. "That's a wonderful idea, Mirabel. What do you have in mind?" Mirabel explained her vision of a community gathering, where local artisans could showcase their work, and there would be activities for children and discussions on standing up against injustice. Jane nodded enthusiastically. "Let's do it. This will be our way of giving back." In the weeks leading up to the event, Jane and Mirabel worked tirelessly to bring the idea to life. Rose contributed by designing posters and invitations, which were distributed throughout the neighborhood. Pastor Michael offered the churchyard as the venue, and many community members volunteered to help with logistics. On the day of the event, the churchyard buzzed with energy. Stalls lined the perimeter, showcasing everything from handmade jewelry to freshly baked goods. Children laughed as they played games, and a local band provided lively music. Jane stood at the center of it all, her heart swelling with gratitude. She spotted Caleb lurking at the edge of the crowd, his face a mixture of bitterness and envy. Jane looked at her daughters and felt a deep sense of fulfillment. "We've been through so much," she said, her voice filled with emotion, "but we've come out stronger. I couldn't have asked for better daughters, and we couldn't have asked for a better mom," Mirabel said, reaching across the table to squeeze Jane's hand. As they laughed and shared stories, Jane realized that despite the challenges, they were building a life filled with love, resilience, and hope. But instead of letting his presence dampen her spirits, she smiled and turned her attention back to during the event. Mirabel stood on a small stage and addressed the crowd. "This gathering is a testament to the strength of our community," she said, her voice steady and confident. "When we stand together, we can overcome any challenge. My family and I are living proof of that. Thank you for being our support system." The crowd erupted into applause, and Jane couldn't help but shed a tear of pride. While the event was a success, life didn't magically become perfect. Caleb, though humiliated by his defeat, continued to spread rumors about Jane, attempting to discredit her. One day, Jane received a visit from Mama Eugene, Caleb's mother. The older woman entered the shop with a stern expression, her hands clutching the strap of her handbag. "Jane," she began, her voice sharp, "you've caused enough trouble for this family. Caleb might have lost, but don't think for a second that you've won." Jane stood tall, refusing to let the woman's words intimidate her. "Mama Eugene, this isn't about winning or losing. It's about doing what's right. Your son tried to take what wasn't his, and the truth came out." Mama Eugene sneered. "You think the truth will protect you? We'll see how long you can keep this up." With that, she turned and left, leaving Jane feeling a mixture of anger and exhaustion. That evening, Jane shared the encounter with Pastor Michael and some trusted community members. "We can't let them intimidate us," Pastor Michael said firmly. "The more they see your strength, the less power they'll have over you." The community rallied around Jane once again, organizing patrols to ensure her safety and spreading positive stories about her resilience and kindness. Slowly but surely, Caleb and his mother's influence began to wane. Mirabel's determination. As the dust settled, Mirabel approached Jane with another idea. "Mom, I've been thinking about going to law school," she said one evening as they sat on the porch. Jane's eyes widened in surprise. "Law school?" "Yes," Mirabel said with a determined nod. "I want to fight for people like us, people who don't have a voice or the resources to stand up for themselves. I want to make a difference." Tears filled Jane's eyes as she pulled her daughter into a tight embrace. "You have no idea how proud I am of you, Mirabel. You can do anything you set your mind to." Mirabel's declaration inspired Rose as well. She threw herself into her passion for design, creating a small portfolio of her work and sharing it online. To Jane's delight, Rose began receiving small commissions from local businesses, helping her gain confidence in her abilities. Hope for the future. As the weeks turned into months, Jane and her daughters found themselves in a better place. The shop was thriving, Mirabel excelled in her studies, and Rose's talent was beginning to gain recognition. One evening, as they sat together at the dinner table, the dawn of a new chapter in Jane's life came with the soft glow of determination. She had weathered storms that could have broken her, but instead, they shaped her into a woman of steel. With each passing day, her strength inspired Mirabel and Rose, who began to embody the resilience they had witnessed in their mother. Months after Mirabel declared her intention to study law, the reality of her ambition began to take shape. Jane, despite her modest earnings from the shop, was determined to support her daughter's dream. One afternoon, as they sat on the porch reviewing university options, Mirabel hesitated. "Mom, I know you're doing so much for us already. I don't want to put too much pressure on you," she said, her voice laced with concern. Jane reached out and held her hand firmly. "Mirabel, you're my daughter. Your dreams are my dreams. We'll find a way." To ease the financial burden, Mirabel started tutoring younger children in the neighborhood. Word of her intelligence and dedication spread quickly, and soon she had more students than she could handle. Jane was proud to see her daughter's independence blossom. Rose, too, was making strides. Her sketches and designs, shared online, began attracting attention beyond their community. One day, she received an email from a small branding agency in Lagos, offering her a freelance project. "Mom, can you believe this?" Rose exclaimed, waving her phone in excitement. "They want me to design a logo for them." Jane's face lit up with pride. "You see, Rose, your hard work is paying off. This is just the beginning." Rose poured herself into the project, spending late nights perfecting her designs. When she submitted the final work, the client was so impressed that they recommended her to others. Slowly but surely, Rose's talent was gaining recognition. Meanwhile, Caleb's life took a downward spiral. His defeat at the council and the loss of community respect left him bitter and isolated. Even his mother, Mama Eugene, began to distance herself from him, frustrated by his inability to regain their family's standing. One evening, Caleb showed up at Jane's shop, his face etched with desperation. "Jane," he said, his voice low, I need help." Jane stared at him, her emotions conflicted. This was the man who had tried to take everything from her, the man who had caused her endless pain. "What do you want, Caleb?" she asked, her tone firm. "I've lost everything," he admitted. "The land, the respect of the community, even my family. I don't know what to do." Jane took a deep breath. Part of her wanted to turn him away, but another part of her couldn't ignore his vulnerability. "You brought this upon yourself, Caleb," she said. "But if you're truly ready to change, you need to start by taking responsibility for your actions. No one will help you unless you help yourself first." Caleb nodded, tears brimming in his eyes. "I'll think about it," he said before leaving. With her daughter's successes and her shop thriving, Jane decided it was time to expand her business. She rented a larger space in the market and planned a grand opening to celebrate. The day of the opening was filled with excitement. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers who had heard of Jane's resilience came to support her. Mirabel and Rose stood proudly by their mother's side as she cut the ribbon to her new shop. As the crowd cheered, Jane felt a surge of gratitude. She addressed the attendees with a heartfelt speech. "Today is not just about me," she began. "It's about everyone who believed in me, who stood by me when things seemed impossible. This shop is a testament to the power of community, resilience, and faith. Thank you all for being part of my journey." As the celebration wound down, Jane was approached by a man in a suit. He introduced himself as Mr. Henry, a businessman who had heard of her story through a mutual acquaintance. "Jane, your resilience and dedication are truly inspiring," he said. "I'm starting a women's empowerment program, and I would love for you to be a part of it. Your story could inspire so many others." Jane was taken aback. "Me? An inspiration?" Mr. Henry smiled. "You're more than that. You're a role model. Think about it and let me know." Jane agreed to consider the offer, realizing that her journey could indeed serve as a beacon of hope for others facing similar struggles. As the weeks turned into months, Jane's life continued to flourish. Her shop became a cornerstone of the community. Mirabel prepared to leave for university, and Rose's design career continued to gain momentum. One evening, as they sat together in their cozy home, Jane looked at her daughters with a deep sense of fulfillment. "We've been through so much," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "But look at us now. We've come so far." Mirabel and Rose nodded, their eyes shining with pride. "You taught us to be strong, Mom," Mirabel said, "and we'll carry that strength with us wherever we go." As they laughed and shared stories, Jane realized that the future was bright. They had faced challenges that could have broken them, but instead, they had risen stronger than ever. Jane's story became a symbol of resilience in the community. Through her involvement in the empowerment program, she helped other women find their strength and rebuild their lives. Years later, as Mirabel graduated from law school and Rose launched her own design agency, they credited their success to the unwavering love and determination of their mother. Jane, now older but just as spirited, watched her daughters thrive with a heart full of pride. She had turned her pain into purpose and her struggles into triumphs, proving that with faith, resilience, and love, anything was possible. Jane's journey teaches us the importance of resilience, courage, and faith in the face of adversity. Despite the overwhelming challenges and betrayals she faced, she never allowed circumstances to define her or her daughter's future. Instead, she rose above the pain and charted a new course for her family. This story reminds us that strength lies in unity, and with determination, even the toughest battles can be won. It's a call to never underestimate the power of a mother's love and the potential of those who are determined to succeed, regardless of the odds. Thank you for watching this inspiring story to the end. Please don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe to my channel for more heartwarming and motivational stories.